The month of Malinsky rolls right along. Our guest this week needs little, if any, introduction, so I'll get to the point. Mitch Moss joining us on the podcast. Mitch is the host of Follow the Money on VSiN. You can catch that weekdays from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And David Malinsky, of course, was a fixture with Mitch and Polly during VSiN's first year on the air. You can follow Mitch on Twitter at Mitch Moss Radio. Mitch, it's awesome to be doing this with you. Welcome to Props and Hops.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Pleasure.
I'd like to start by simply having you describe your relationship with Dave. A lot of us heard you and Dave interact on the air, but what was it like just knowing Dave in general beyond that setting?
Well, okay, so he was coming on with us on the air to do hits once a week, and that eventually turned into something that was going to be much more often than that. But me personally, how I knew him, honestly, we were getting to know each other more and more over that first year. And before we started VSiN, I listened to him over and over and over again, like on local radio, but never really met him. And in fact, one of the first times that I ever met him, where it was like a true sit down, was like a lunch that we had at his favorite spot of Lotus of Siam. So I had come across him before, like he would come into the radio station where I worked before, and we would cross paths and I probably say hello a couple times, whatever, but that was pretty much it. And so we were getting a stronger relationship over time. And it was just, getting better and better as the weeks went on. So my respect level kept growing for the guy, just because when you listen to him, he came across as someone who was so sharp, and he had all these great angles and great betting tidbits and knowledgeable insights that you could just get smarter from. And then when you met him in person, he was even like a nicer guy. He came across very nice. He never came across as being arrogant. And then you saw it, when you met him in person, you're like, oh my God, this guy's even a better person than I actually thought. So it was really the best of both worlds.
And to that end, is there anything that stands out in your memory going back to that first time you met Dave in person? I know for myself, it was showing up to a restaurant. It wasn't Lotus of Siam, but we were at a good Chinese restaurant grabbing lunch one football Friday. I showed up with a pen and paper ready to take notes and have my mind blown and just totally transformed the way I bet on sports. Dave wanted to talk about anything but sports betting because he had so many other interests. I'm wondering if that was a parallel to the first time that you connected with him in person as well.
Yeah, I mean, he did have we're going to get to what happened to him eventually, but I mean, his love for other projects, and he was fascinated by the oldest living trees in at least the state of Nevada, maybe even beyond that. So he was working on that. So it wasn't just the sports angle for sure with him. He loved to talk about food, for example. I mean, surprise, surprise, right? And he could give you the best rundown, the best like dish or best, order that you can make at several restaurants across the city. But I thought it was great because when we showed up, he was already waiting at Lotus of Siam. And they're known for many things. They might have some of the best beef jerky, which is kind of odd, but they have some of the best beef jerky I've ever had in my entire life. And I would consider myself almost like a beef jerky connoisseur. I love it. I've always loved it. So he had it like hidden underneath like a newspaper, if I recall correctly. And Paulie and I sit down, and he like removes the newspaper, and he already had the beef jerky order, and he grabbed the plate and put it right in front of us. And he's like, there you go. You always got to start off with a plate of beef jerky here at Lotus of Siam. So I'm like, okay, this is a pretty good start.
Oh man, I remember when we were at Lotus, you, Paulie, myself, Las Vegas Chris, and my good friend Mike Roselli did a great lunch at Lotus as a tribute to Dave last year during Bet Bash. And I had been sleeping on the beef jerky there, and that was one of the standouts from that experience. I think moving forward every time, that's absolutely the way to kick it off. And good to know that, of course, Dave would have agreed with that sentiment.
Yep, no question.
So when it comes to your relationship with Dave, obviously multifaceted, not just in the sports betting realm, but food and nature and beyond that, I'm sure. I would like to hone in on an area where most people heard you interacting with Dave, some legendary interviews on Follow the Money. And this was often taking place at about 5 a.m. Pacific, you guys uncovering gems before most of the West Coast was even awake. I'm wondering, Mitch, if you have any really particularly memorable on-air moments with Dave.
Oh, we have several. In fact, it's been more than 5 years now since he passed, and we still go back and replay some of the old audio on an annual basis. Before March Madness, we play something where we asked him what it's like, what his routine is during a busy weekend or March Madness, because it was right around the corner. And he went on like this great 2 minute, like almost, it's like he just ad-libbed it, but it was almost like an essay that he had in the back of his head that he wanted to share with everybody. It was about eating clean that time of year and staying clean. And he described that you're not going to become a long-time winning bettor if you approach weekends like that with beer and chicken wings. And he's just like, that's not the healthy approach that you want to take to it. First of all, he talked about having a state-of-the-art like elliptical machine in his living room, like in front of TVs that he would use all the time to stay in shape. But that's where he went down this path of eating clean, and he brought up the phrase sophisticated salads. And he went down and he was talking about how Lotus of Siam, they offered some of the most delicious salads. And he said, not like your ordinary, like, garden food. It's going to be, he went on to explain exactly how sophisticated it was. And then like the lemon ginger was part of a regular routine for him to stay fresh, good for recovery. And it was just 2 minutes of magic on the air that we did not anticipate him actually conveying. We didn't tell him we were going to ask him about that. He didn't tell us that was going to be his answer. And we play that every single year in March. We retweet it like every single year. And the reaction that we get is just, my God, I miss that guy so much. That was just brilliant insight from him. And sorry, my dog is suddenly choking on something. So I don't know if you can hear that or not.
Oh, is he okay?
But it was just, it's the same thing every single year from different people, because you never know like who's going to be watching or listening in the audience. You could have new audience members every single day. So for them to hear that for the first time, even though we play it every single year, you can see that it hits home with them.
And I love how timeless that is, because I look forward to you guys resharing that every year. But to your point, undoubtedly, there are a lot of people coming across it for the first time, and it's as relevant today as it was then. And I think that's so on point for who Dave was. And as you talk about the diet and the elliptical, everything was so intentional with him. I remember when we met, again, it was a football Friday, the first time we met for lunch, and he took the biggest to-go order I've ever seen. And he mentioned that he wouldn't be leaving his house again until Monday morning with a wall-to-wall football weekend.
See, and that was part of the tie-in. He would talk about getting catered food on big weekends, usually like a football weekend or like a March Madness or whatever it is, because he didn't want to leave. He wanted to be at his home in front of the TVs, in front of everything they could have in front of him, and just sit there and pick from his favorite food in the entire city. So he would do that quite often. It's really like an advantage play when you think about it.
Absolutely. And it wasn't an advantage play just because in his mind it was food that he really enjoyed, that he could afford to get his hands on. But everything was all about you get out what you put in, and knowing that he would eat really good food, but it wasn't just good in terms of how it tasted. It was good in terms of how it helped him get through those weekend grinds, getting on the elliptical. He also had a sauna in his home, by the way. He wasn't one for, as far as I recall, fancy clothing or a fancy car, nothing like that. He made a good living, but he would pick his spots to do things that might be more upscale at surface value because there was a very specific purpose for those purchases. So he was willing to splurge when the situation warranted it, but everything was always just designed so meticulously.
No, totally agree. That's the thing. He didn't need to have like the brand new fancy car or anything like that. It was that probably would have been a negative EV play for him, right? Because why? Like, what's the point? But when things that are more meaningful to his lifestyle and how healthy he's going to be, like the food and like the exercise, then he's going to go all out and, treat himself like pretty much any time that he wants.
And sticking with the food for just a moment longer, of course, at Lotus, he was also known as Friday Dave to their staff for his legendary takeout orders on Friday afternoons. Every restaurant he stepped into, he seemed to know the owner, the chef, and they knew and adored him equally. I'm wondering, Mitch, with Dave's fondness for local independent restaurants in Las Vegas, if you could take him to one place today that maybe wasn't around 5 or so years ago, what would you choose as a new spot in Vegas to introduce Dave to?
So I just had a new place. I think it's been around for a minute, but I had a new place recently near Chinatown, and I think it's called Shanghai Taste. And they make these soup dumplings that I don't know where they've been my entire life. But my wife and I just went there, I think it was last week. And like, I love Asian food anyway. It's it might be my favorite. Well, we'll see. Could be, it's top 2 probably for me overall. But then you can break it down.
What else is in consideration for the top spot?
Oh man, well, I love Italian food. Um, I'd say probably Italian and Asian food, probably my favorite
Mm,
two. Really,
nice.
gun to my head, those are going to be the two. But the Shanghai taste, and this place is just slam packed. And we get there, and my wife's had them before. She's been trying to get me to have them for a while. Finally, I had these. They come out, they're piping hot, but the dough is absolutely, oh my God, I want that dough like every day of my life. It was perfect,
Mm.
like the perfect texture with a nice, like almost char to it, but yet it was soft. So it was almost like the perfect s'mores. Okay, so, and these soup dumplings that are on the menu, like I was saying, the dough is so perfect. Then you bite into it, the pork or the meat that's on the inside, it explodes with flavor in your mouth. But then you got to be careful because the soup is so hot on the inside. You almost had to open it up first or poke like a hole in it. You could top it off with some of the like homemade chili sauce. And again, like I said, I know that they've been around for a long time. I don't know where they've been my whole life. So I think that Dave, I consider Dave like almost an Anthony Bourdain of the sports betting world as well. Like he would definitely have an appreciation for something like that.
Absolutely. And I can picture Dave also being so fond of any sort of food and beer pairing. I could picture him looking to pair that down with some sort of a Kolsch or a nice little pale ale. Nothing too bold to overshadow the food, but for that temperature contrast, if you're getting some really hot soup in that dumpling, having a cold beverage on hand might help to balance things out as well.
Sure, it's like the sweet and salty at the same time,
Yeah,
sort of.
yeah.
Where you got
Sometimes
to have the hot and the ice cold like that to balance each other off.
Yeah, sometimes the complementary pairings are the way to go, but sometimes that contrast just makes all the difference, and that can really be mind blowing. And I'm glad that you mentioned this option as a place that I know you wish you could take Dave, but I was thinking I'll be out there for Bet Bash in a few weeks, and the better part of a week in Vegas is a pretty long trip for a visitor, and sometimes that seems like it might be too long. And at the same time, with all the restaurant recommendations I've been coming across, it's not going to be enough to get everywhere. So I'll put this on the list and hopefully get there in a few weeks. And if not, that is going to be high on the radar for quite a while to come.
Oh God, you could move here for the entire summer and you won't hit even close to the spots that you're going to have to hit.
Yeah, ironically, I just reached out to Piskey with the Banfield group. Not sure if you've crossed paths with those guys in any way. They're a group of pro bettors based in Canada, but this guy Piskey moved out west to Vegas for this past NFL season. And I had them on my podcast prior to the move to Vegas, and they talked about a restaurant called Capo's. Like, speaking of Italian food, I haven't been yet, but I've heard good things from a few different people. And it seems like it's got kind of a mob vibe, really dimly lit. Apparently, they have the best meatball you can get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And they talked so highly of it. And Piskey was out there for months, and he wasn't able to get to Capo's during
Wow.
the NFL season. There was just so many other great options. So that's another spot that I'll try to get with him and make it right that he wasn't able to get there during his mini residency in Vegas a few months ago.
Sure, that's a legendary spot. Again, the Italian places here that you can go to are just it's one right after another. Casa di Amore over on the east side of Tropicana. As soon as you walk in, it feels like old school mob or mafia. It's just like dripping off the walls. Like the history in a spot like that is really, really cool. But there are endless spots like that to go to here in town.
All right. Well, I will look to get to at least one, if not a couple, every day during Bet Bash when there's a chance to go check those out. And Mitch, keeping in the theme of this being the month of Malinsky, I know you guys were able to develop a great relationship beyond the sports betting realm while you had a chance to know him. I'm also curious how his sudden passing in April of 2018 affected you in the moment.
Well, I was completely gutted by it. And as I was saying earlier, like I was getting to know Dave more and more as the weeks went on over that first full year of us being on VSiN. So it's not like we were best friends or anything like that, but he's a great guy and we learned so much from him. And I was obsessed with going back, and there's a guy actually who studies this for a living, people who suddenly disappear, like on walks or on when they go up hiking in mountains. And I was, for that entire weekend at least, all I could do was listen to YouTube. It wasn't necessarily video, but it was just like audio recordings or almost like old podcasts almost of this guy talking about his experiences when this has happened before. And he brought up Dave Malinsky in one of them. And that's all I could think about the whole time. And I was fascinated by like this guy's knowledge of the topic of people just disappearing, what happens to him. And then we didn't, like, because nobody knew. He was never found for the first however long it was. And so people are like, is he still alive? What could possibly be happening? Dave's too sharp. Like, where is he? Why? And so we thought something was up, though, too, right away, because first of all, Dave was such a great guy. And that's another reason why it hurt so much. He was coming on with us once a week. And our hours are very early in the morning. For those that don't know, we're on from 4 until 7 a.m. Pacific time. So even getting like guests from the East Coast occasionally can be difficult. Forget about getting guests from the West Coast very often, just because it's so early in the morning when we're on live. Well, not to Dave, because one of the things that Dave first told us about is when we asked him, why do you wake up so early? And he goes, because I don't want to miss out on making money. Because when I wake up, I don't want to miss any major line movement. I want to be there with the news. I want to see the screen moving. I want to get my bets in when numbers first pop. So he was up at 4 o'clock in the morning anyway, all the time. He offered, and we're going to go down this path. We were going to have him come on every single day, Monday through Friday, and we were going to call the segment 5 Minutes with Malinsky. Of course, he agreed to it. And he actually said, I think he was coming on at the time at 5:30. He offered to actually come on earlier with us. And that's when he was going to, start or continue the project that he was working on up in Mount Charleston. And so he was going to come on like around 4:30 every single morning, Monday through Friday. And it was going to be like, oh God, this is incredible, because he's one of the sharpest sports bettors alive. And the way that he gets his message across, not many people can do that, where it's going to be understood by people who are betting sports for the first time, or from sharp people who've been doing this for 20 years professionally. So for him to offer that out, we just thought that was so cool. And another thing is that he would always send over notes that he wanted to hit, at least 1 or 2, maybe 3 things that he wanted to talk about or that he found interesting for that day's slate. And I think this was a Monday when we were coming back on the air. We had not heard from him. And our producer called his house and his sister answered. And immediately, like, our antennas went up, like, this is the most anti-Dave thing that we've ever heard. He's not around. She wasn't giving us too many details, but our producer could kind of tell, like, she didn't know what was up. She was at his house, and he never reached out to us at all over the weekend about his hit. That was completely unlike Dave Malinsky. So right away, like, our stomachs kind of sank. And then we didn't know, like I said, how long, do you recall exactly how long was it before he was found?
Yeah, he went for a hike on a Saturday morning, and as I recall, he was found on a Friday afternoon.
Okay, so it was almost like a full week, and then we were, fingers crossed, like everybody, maybe he's still alive somehow, and then obviously that never came to fruition. So that whole time before he was found, I mean, that's all we could do is talk, and then we're like, please tell us something did not happen to this guy. And beyond that, I said this from day one and before PASPA was repealed, like, in this space and how much gambling content has blown up over the last 5 years, Dave Malinsky would have been an absolute rock star if he wanted to be. He would have been as big, right? He would have been as big of a star in this field as Dave Malinsky would have wanted to take it. So if it was like getting out of hand and too much, I think he would have said, no, I'm okay in my spot right now. Or if he wanted to be like the main voice, like pretty much anywhere in the country or beyond, I think he would have been the guy. I honestly do. And I said that from 2017 on, and I stick with it because that's how sharp the guy was. And, I've been in broadcasting since professionally since like 1996, working in this field. It's to get that perfect combo of somebody that knows what they're doing on the air, but also that has the background. Because I've never been a professional sports bettor. I love to bet. I love covering gambling, but I've never done it. I couldn't do it professionally. But for that guy to do it professionally and to be that smart and to come across like he did on the air, it was the ideal combination. And it was so rare, Matt. I still don't know anybody who can touch him, to be honest. And this is 5 years later now. So all of that combined is just, several reasons why to this day it still hurts.
Yeah, it's quite the enduring impact, and in some ways, I've heard people refer to it as one of the worst bad beats that's ever affected the sports betting community. To lose Dave way too soon, the way we did, and at the same time, I try to look at it thinking there's not anything as catchy as bad beat for the flip side of that equation, but just as fortunate of an occurrence as it could be to have gotten to know Dave while I had the chance to. I think similar to you, I was just getting to know him better by the week, by the day when all this happened. And the impact that he continues to have clearly on both of our lives and on so many others, it's devastating to have lost him when we did, and I think we are still fortunate beyond measure that we were able to cross paths with him while we did, and we can still access his written words whenever we want to. We can still access a lot of his spoken word whenever we want to, and sometimes it feels like ripping off a band-aid, and it's tough to go there sometimes and read his work and hear his voice and know he's no longer with us, but the timelessness of all of that still being with us, I know it sucks on so many levels. And at the same time, I'm just trying to grasp at any silver linings we can take away from the whole experience.
Oh, I mean, a lot of the stuff that he wrote about or talked about is going to be evergreen. I mean, we can go back and have this conversation in 15 years and look back and say, man, Malinsky was spot on back in the 90s or the early 2000s or 2015, whatever it was. I mean, it would have been stuff that's going to hold up for as long as I can possibly imagine.
And Mitch, I'm wondering if there's a parallel somewhere here. On Twitter last week, you posted that your father, John, would have turned 77 years old on July 10th. And personally, Dave is the closest thing that I've ever had to a friend and father figure in one. I'm wondering if there might be any parallels between the impact that your father had on you and the impact that Dave had on you while you got a chance to know him.
Well, yeah, from a different standpoint, because I mean, he almost could have been like a father figure to many when it came to this racket, right? I mean, because he was so experienced in it, and just he was. This would be my one piece of. I know you're going to ask me about this one piece of advice from Dave, but it would be just to be a good human being on top of everything else, because he wanted to help out everybody, and in this world that we live in, and it's been like this now for a long time, but like Twitter sucks. I wish it didn't, but I mean, it's almost impossible to get involved or to follow like sports betting on Twitter just because people can be so negative. And rather than the flip side, and Dave was the exact opposite. And life is too short to just be pissy and negative every single day and look at that side. When this guy never did it, and he was more successful than almost anybody to do this. So that's the angle that I like. And I mean, he said it without saying it, right? You can just get the vibe from him. The body language was always good, always a smile on his face. So treat people like you would want to be treated. And even if, if you're awesome at this, be helpful. And if they ask you a dumb question, for example, about something to do in sports betting, don't be a jerk to them. Flip it around and try to help them out a little bit so they can actually learn and grow from that, because that's exactly what Dave did for, several years. And he didn't have to, but he did. And so that's one of the many ways that I will certainly remember Dave.
I really appreciate that thought for a couple reasons. One of them, building off what you said at the end there would be people with questions in the Point Blank forums, Dave's column Point Blank that he wrote weekdays for several years prior to the end of his life. And some people would be really sophisticated. Others would have very elementary questions, and there was never any judgment. Dave could have gone toe to toe with the elite of the elite handicappers, and he could have explained anything to a complete novice without any bit of judgment in a way that was elevated and yet relatable at the same time. So what you said at the end there just really struck a chord with me. And also just thinking to Twitter being in many ways a toxic space with a lot of negativity, Dave bringing positivity to the sports betting community. I just caught it at the best possible time. I was a very early bettor when I came across Dave's work, and for him to have the only online community that I can ever recall with essentially no trolling, or as soon as anything started, Dave had a way to just take charge and in a very respectful but firm way put an end to it. And some of my best friendships that I've developed over the past decade plus that I've been betting are because I got to know Dave and got to know people through him. And as much of a cesspool as gambling Twitter can be, or all of Twitter or social media for that matter, there are still really good people out there. Unfortunately, they can be few and far between at sometimes, or it may at least feel that way. But just by being a good person, to your point, opening those doors, even in things like sports gambling, you can find some of the coolest people in the world.
Yep. Well said. Spot on, man.
Mitch, I appreciate your piece of life advice for the audience. I've also got to ask if there is anything from a sports betting standpoint, the way that you got to talk to Dave so regularly on your show, Follow the Money. Is there maybe one insight from him that sticks with you to this day that you can still apply in your own betting?
Well, okay, I'll give you three things. And again, I'll go back
Nice.
to like this is 2017-ish, maybe 2018. Again, people have to remember this, that in Las Vegas, yes, sports betting has been legal for a long, long time, but we never had, it's not like we had online betting or apps available until many years into this. And when the apps were first available, Dave just had great advice about how the app is way more important now because, and he lived close to the Westgate. And so he brought up, like, before the app, he didn't want to hit the red light that was in that neighborhood. He wanted to get because if he missed $1.10 and all of a sudden it's $1.14, he wasn't going to bet it. So the app just changed things for him. And that ties into like waking up early, not missing anything. Where when those lines first pop, and I think it was like an NBA, the NBA season when he was talking about this, because a lot of times NBA numbers won't be up because of, several questions until the morning of, and he's like, I don't want to miss any of this stuff. Like, I know what number I want to bet. If it's available, I'm going to be awake and I'm going to be able to bet that before the line moves on me. And this is one very specific piece of like sports betting that he said on the air one time, and we've since called it a Malinsky special, and this is kind of taken off. And it's one simple angle. It's not the be all end all for sure, but it's one piece to consider when you're handicapping pretty much any sport. And that is when a team comes home for the first game from a long road trip, specifically if that team's from the West Coast and they've been on a long East Coast West trip, or vice versa. East Coast team comes to the West Coast and they've been out there for a long time. The first game back at home, you always want to be very careful betting that team because they've been gone for so long. They finally are sleeping in their own bed. Maybe they have a wife, maybe they have kids, and they have to go back and play. Like in baseball, maybe they played 10 straight road games. They come back home, no day off. They got to get right back after a long flight and go play at home that night. It's not that easy. So that goes for any sport. And he brought it up one time, and it was something like so simple. And again, not the be all end all, but it's kind of cool that on our show anyway, that it still lives and people still take that into consideration. And we kick that around from time to time about the old Dave Malinsky special, as we call it.
I love that point because actually to kick off this interview series this month, I had Mike Roselli on the show, who we met at Lotus last year during Bet Bash. And Mike talked about that exact angle, sticking with him as well. And it's interesting because we got into a back and forth about how to quantify it. And there's no easy answer. It doesn't mean that you automatically bet the other team. But I think what sticks with me the most is sometimes just being able to avoid a loser can be much more valuable than forcing the play on a winner, because you're saving yourself $1.10 instead of winning $1. So if nothing else, being leery of playing that team when it's just returned home, it doesn't mean you must bet the other way, but you've got to have a hell of a case to still get down on that team that just finished up a road trip.
Yep, exactly right. And that's the whole key to the handicap. Like, you might love the home team, but maybe that should enter your line of thinking for at least a second. Like, oh, hey, hold on a second here. They're just back from that long. Okay, I'll dial it back a little bit here then.
Indeed. All right. So that was one great point. I believe you said you might have a couple more.
Just with the waking up early.
Yes.
How that was his advice. And again, and I brought this up earlier too, just the healthy lifestyle that he led as well. I think it's a great idea to have a nice piece of workout equipment somehow, like in around your house, maybe in front of some TVs. Because I think it all ties in, because you don't want to attack a big weekend and have, be 8 beers deep into it. And then all of a sudden you're live betting and you're forcing bets like that too. That's always going to stick with me for sure.
Yeah. And even on a podcast with hops in the name is a nod to craft beer, I can't push back on that advice at all.
No, because you can, there's nothing, obviously nothing wrong with enjoying a pop or two, but during like the March Madness really stood out to me. Mm-hmm. You don't want to start drinking when everybody else comes to Las Vegas at 10 o'clock in the morning when you have, 16 games that day. It's a long day. You got to really go in moderation.
Of course. And there's a time to grind and there's a time to unwind. And knowing how to
Yeah.
pick those spots can make all the difference in the long run. Mitch, I really appreciate the advice from you. Yeah, getting up early, taking care of yourself physically as well as mentally, that angle on teams returning from a long road trip. Again, one more thing from Malinsky that has proven to be quite timeless. One more thing in the sports betting sense. I know if Dave were still with us, he would be a superstar, again, if he so chose, at a place like Bet Bash. And with Bet Bash taking place in Vegas in just a few weeks, you will be hosting a panel on Friday. I think that's August 11th. And I'd love it if you could speak a little bit to the panel that you'll be moderating and what you're looking to get out of that experience.
Okay, so yeah, I can't wait for this. It's going to be with some professional bettors, Paul Stone, also Eddie Walls. They're great on college football. Paul's been on our show every week for several years now. Great dude. I've listened to Eddie like on Twitter Spaces before. Very, very sharp. Bud Elliott is going to be on the panel as well, and Matt Metcalf, who was the former sportsbook director at Circa, along with Connor Howard, who is now in charge of getting the college football opening lines up at Circa. I don't have like everything I want to ask those guys yet, but it's only going to be 55 minutes. This thing with those five guys, it could be 4 hours, I'm guessing. So I'm going to have to figure out a way to crunch everything down on that. But I can't wait to figure out the differences there in the back and forth between Connor and Matt making those numbers, and then how Eddie, Paul, Bud, how they attack the card every single Saturday as well, Sunday when it comes out, I should say. And then like I want to know how much college football they watch every single Saturday, for example. How much live betting are they doing? How many takeaways are they watching or mentally making or even writing down during games, just to file that away for when they're making the numbers the next day for when the card comes out. There's so much to get into about that. And if they look for specific games right away when Circa releases the entire card on Saturday, do they have games that they specifically want to look for? Or do they just have all the numbers lined up ready to go and they start going on the app and like that one stands out, I gotta bet those. And then are all the unit sizes the same? Like, do they max bet every game on the opener, or do they like games maybe a little bit more than others? How much does maybe personal opinion ever play into this, if it ever does whatsoever? Does watching live games jade anything for them? So maybe they don't want to, because I've known guys, I came out here in 2001. I met some pros right away who said, I try to not watch games that I have a lot of money on because I don't want to be jaded for future stuff. I want to go back and crunch the numbers instead. So I will find that that 55, I think it's 55 minutes, 40, whatever it is, it's going to fly by.
Yeah, that is going to be jam-packed. And as we prepare to wrap up this conversation, I'm just so glad to have that to look forward to. Bet Bash is going to be full of great experiences, but witnessing that conversation is going to belong near the top of the list. Mitch, as we round the corner here, I also want to make sure that if people want to support VSiN and the work that you and many others are doing over there, the audience is aware that for a limited time, you can get a 1-month VSiN Pro subscription for just $9.99. You'll get access to VSiN's 24/7 channel, special betting guides, pro betting tips, and more, all for less than $10. You can visit vsin.com/subscribe for more info. You can also check out Mitch's work, again, as the host of Follow the Money on VSiN, 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern time on weekdays. Some early mornings, 4 to 7 a.m. Pacific, but the show also published in podcast form, so you can catch it wherever you happen to be located. And Mitch is on Twitter at Mitch Moss Radio. Mitch, this has been such a blast. I really want to thank you for all the time and insight that you've shared in this conversation.
Well, Matt, you're far too nice for having me, and those kind words as well. I appreciate you having me. It was a pleasure talking about the late, great Dave Malinsky. Anytime to talk about Dave.
All right, hopefully we can resume the conversation, maybe over some sophisticated salads at Lotus of Siam sometime in the next few weeks. And in the meantime, also want to thank those of you listening to and watching this conversation. Thank you for your time, and I'll catch you again next week with a grand finale for the Month of Malinsky.